Hi, so we're going to talk a little bit about Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus, he was close with Sartre and Beauvoir, but he and Sartre later had a falling out over political issues, particularly Sartre's support of communism. I'll talk a little bit about the Myth of Sisyphus, the larger work, before it gets into the part that's excerpted in Kaufman. So the start of it wants to raise the question of the absurdity of life and how to respond to that. One of the probably best known quotes from Camus is this. It says, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy." So you can see by that he has a pretty different perspective from a lot of philosophers, and that this is what the Myth of Sisyphus, the entire work, is grappling with, is like, why should one live one's life at all? And this is a particular issue because of the apparent absurdity of life. Now, Camus isn't claiming that the world by itself is absurd. The world, without human beings to have any reaction to it, is neither absurd nor meaningful or purposeful. It just is. Absurdity always arises from some kind of discrepancy between two ways of looking at something. Right. And I just want to recommend, if you're interested, Thomas Nagel has a short piece called The Absurd, which talks about, how our sense of absurdity comes about. So for Camus, he wants to argue that absurdity arises from that discrepancy between the world, which doesn't have any objective meaning, doesn't have any unifying principles or anything like that, and our expectation of what it's supposed to be like. We assume that there's going to be some kind of guidance, some kind of meaning, some kind of purpose, and it isn't there. So when we are confronted with this world, which seems intensely important to us, the facts of our daily life are important to us, but the world doesn't deliver on those expectations, and it doesn't conform to the kind of narrative structure that we feel like it ought to have. And so that can lead us to feeling like, it's all pretty pointless after all. And this is why so many of us will turn to some source of meaning, whether that be through philosophy, religion, or whatever, which will claim that there are these guideposts that we can follow. Now, that's part of the reason why Camus is critical of a lot of the history of philosophy, is that it seeks to extract meaning from something that's meaningless. And even existentialism, he argued, tried to do that. And that's part of the reason why he rejects the label of existentialist. He says, I'm not trying to deny the absurdity of life. I'm not trying to claim that life is meaningful. I'm just accepting the absurdity of life, saying like, all that we can do to respond to that is just live our lives with passion. He says, I draw from the absurd three consequences, which are my revolt, my freedom, and my passion. So I think it's worth considering, do existentialists merit the criticism that Camus places on them, that they try to deny the absurdity of life, try to draw some meaning out of this meaninglessness? Or also, the question of whether Camus himself deserves to be characterized in the same way, because it does sound like he's trying to show that life is worthwhile, or it can be worthwhile, depending on what, how we choose to respond to it. I like this other quote from Camus, from The Myth of Sisyphus, where he says, "At any street corner, the feeling of absurdity can strike any man in the face." So we're just going about our day, doing whatever we happen to be doing, and we can just be struck with that sense of the absurd. I would agree that at least that's my own experience. Okay, So where do we draw meaning? Now, a lot of it might be in our political activism or political participation, things that we really care about, and those were things that Camus did care deeply about. He was active in the French Resistance, in journalism. He was active in concern with Algeria. He was a French Algerian, and he there in Algeria in his youth he was very active in soccer. He was deeply committed to it, and I think one of the things he valued was the kind of simple morality associated with good sportsmanship and what it is to work together as a team. He felt like philosophy tries to overcomplicate questions of morality, and you can learn a lot just from your sort of basic interaction with other human beings. All right, so let's turn to the myth of Sisyphus itself. What's the last chapter of this larger work that is excerpted in the Kaufman anthology? So the myth of Sisyphus itself, in Greek mythology, Sisyphus is being punished. So we know a lot about his punishment, that he's forced to push this rock up a hill and it rolls back down, and he's supposed to do this over and over for eternity. Now, what is he being punished for? Now, it's true there are a lot of myths about this, and Camus kind of emphasizes that there's no definitive story. In a lot of versions of the Sisyphus story, Sisyphus seems like quite a jerk. He's reported to have killed his house guests, repeatedly killed people who were staying in his home, and he tricked the gods a variety of times. He tricked the gods in order to escape death in a few different versions of the story. So Camus doesn't really emphasize the really pretty lousy things that Sisyphus is alleged to do. He kind of wants us to be on Sisyphus's side. So it's like he's a passionate guy. He doesn't want to die. He doesn't kowtow to the gods, etc. So and the task itself, the reason why it's such a distressing task is that it seems so futile and meaningless. And a lot of us can feel this sense in our day-to-day lives, maybe particularly under the current circumstances where we're sheltering in place or whatever like that. People feel like the days run together. But even in our ordinary lives, under non-pandemic circumstances, you can get that sense of just constant repetition where it just can just wear down on you. I mean, I know I've sometimes had that feeling, and I suppose everybody has sometimes in their work life where they just feel like it's relentless. Or with cleaning, you wash your dishes and then the next day you have to wash those dishes again, and over and over doing the same tasks, and for what? And again, that's where that sense of absurdity can slap you in the face, and you just feel like, what is the point of all this? So the punishment of Sisyphus, I think, is particularly distressing to us because it echoes that sense of absurdity that we often feel in day-to-day life. Okay, now that's the punishment, and what Camus focuses on is not that relentlessness and pointlessness of the punishment, but what does Sisyphus experience while going through this, and particularly after he's gone through the strain and effort pushing this boulder up a hill, when it rolls back down and he has to walk back down and push it back up the hill again, what is he thinking about? What is he thinking about on that trip back down the mountain? And for Camus, he says, this is the conscious moment. This is, in our daily life, the parallel to that is those moments when the absurd slaps us in the face, where we're sitting there, we're thinking about it. We're not just distracted by the busyness of day-to-day life. We're just aware of the reality of our situation. And that without that consciousness, the punishment would not even be a punishment. Okay. So where does Sisyphus's freedom come in? To be tormented by the gods for all eternity in this way might seem like the least free a person can possibly be. He has this one task to do, and he has to do it forever, and he has no other alternative. But the freedom that does exist comes in terms of how Sisyphus responds to it. All right. So there are a couple of different responses that Camus talks about. One is scorn. He says, there's no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. So you might say, regardless of how you might be constrained or confined, you can always be defiant. You can rebel against that. But you might say scorn, I mean, spending your life in scorn might not be your cup of tea. Maybe that's not the way that you want to spend your time. And we do care deeply, human beings, about being happy and enjoying our lives, and a lifetime of bitterness may not seem like a very enjoyable lifetime. Yeah, so that's another possibility in how to respond to that. And what Camus ends with is, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Even in the process of doing this, we can imagine him to be happy, pushing this boulder up the hill, watching it roll back down, returning to push it back up again. It's like, why? Why must we imagine Sisyphus happy? I had a friend where we were talking about this, and he was like, well, maybe Sisyphus just loves pushing rocks. I don't think that's Camus' point, that Sisyphus is just like really into pushing rocks. That I guess would make it enjoyable, but I think it's just, he can take in what's around him, take in his own experience, and enjoy it. We have a choice of how to respond to what's going on, whether we feel like we do or not. We so commonly just react to what's happening to us, but we could shift our perspective on it, and see it a different way and truly enjoy it. Now, it's often, that saying ignorance is bliss, it's often presented like we have a choice between being blissfully ignorant, deluded but happy, or seeing the truth, being cynical and pessimistic, right? And what Camus is really opening up here is another possibility. Couldn't we see reality, see the absurdity of life, see that there is no overriding objective purpose or meaning, and be completely content with that, be happy, and embrace that? I think that's a very appealing possibility. Like, we don't have to fabricate some kind of illusion in order to enjoy our lives and to embrace the things that are in front of us, that we're able to do. Now, I do want to kind of throw out there another possibility, is like, Camus could be wrong. Maybe life isn't meaningless. Maybe there is an objective purpose or meaning that he just hasn't caught sight of, right? That's certainly a possibility. And I want to ask if that alleviates the problem, if that basically makes existentialism as a whole kind of like off track, because it seems like it's premised on the idea that there isn't any kind of universal or objective meaning. Or certainly Camus' take on it has that characteristic. But I think even for those who do believe, like when you look at, say Buber or Kierkegaard, especially theistic existentialists, even the possibility that there is some larger order or larger plan or deeper meaning doesn't entirely eliminate the challenge of finding meaning in life, because we don't have direct access to that. We don't know what's true, so it does require a certain amount of just guessing and trusting and having faith. So whether you agree with Camus' initial assumption about the absurdity of life or not, we're still faced with that existentialist dilemma of what to believe about our lives and how to make it meaningful. All right, so I'll wrap up there. If you have any questions about Camus or about any of the material in the course, please let me know. Thank you.